Hello, I'm Regina Botras, and this is Backstage, where we talk with the who's who on stage, in dance, comedy and performing arts, speaking with the leading theatre makers of our times and how they came to the stage and what drives them and inspires them. I am joined by Matt Day, the actor playing John Reid in Sydney Theatre Company's Sunday, directed by Sarah Goods and based on the lives and times of Sunday and John Reid at Heide, their property in regional Melbourne, at the time when Sidney Nolan was painting his Ned Kelly series. Matt is an actor, as I said, for Sydney Theatre Company. He's performed in Blithe Spirit, The Deep Blue Sea, The Wonderful World of Dissociation, and so many more. He's also performed for Melbourne Theatre Company in North by Northwest and a whole long list. Griffin Theatre Company. He's done so many films and been across our screens for so long now. I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of his name. Welcome to Stages, Matt Day.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. So this had a production in Melbourne and it's on our stages now. This story, I understand, came about in a relationship or a conversation between the director and the writer. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. I think it was Sarah who really wanted to tell this story. She's been kind of obsessed with it for a long time. And I think it was 2017 when Anthony Way, our writer, came on board, and they started developing it, and then they kind of got to a script that they were happy with around 2020, which was really bad timing, given that was the start of the pandemic. And originally we were meant to put this on in 2021, at which point I'd been cast and there was another actor actually playing Sidney Nolan at the time. And Nikki and I flew up to Darwin and did 2 weeks lockdown in there because Sydney was in lockdown. So we did 2 weeks quarantine in Darwin to get into Victoria. And then about 3 days after we landed in Melbourne, they went into a lockdown. So we were kind of stuck in these hotel rooms for about 6 weeks trying to rehearse this play on Zoom, which didn't work. They were hoping to get an exemption to be able to put it on or film it or something. But anyway, a year later, we got to put it on in Melbourne. And it's turned out okay.
I think it's turned out pretty okay. Did you? I mean, this is probably an obvious question, but did you visit the house, the Heide house, the property? I know it's a museum now.
Yeah, I knew Heide. I grew up in Melbourne, so it's a kind of part of the fabric in Melbourne. And I'd been out there as a child. It's often a place to go out and have picnics, and you can run around the grounds and visit the galleries, obviously. So I knew about Heide, and I knew about the Heide Circle. I didn't know much about Sunday and John until this landed in my lap. And then, of course, the research began, and I learned a lot more as we went along.
So what did you find as you went researching into their relationship, the complexities of it? I mean, they're such an influential artist couple in the Australian arts and literary landscape, and you, John, especially as well. You as John, I mean. What did you find out as you went digging around that surprised you or informed you?
I think the thing that struck me the most was really the huge debt we owe them to being obviously patrons of the arts when it just was not really a thing in the 1930s when they really kicked off. And I think they bought Heide in 1934. And they had this really clear vision of what it was they wanted to do and this kind of world that they wanted to create. And they were really very serious people who had this serious view about creating art in an Australian accent, in an Australian voice, and to kind of create this world and to nurture artists and to bring it to the world. They looked down upon people who kind of fled to Europe. In fact, that's quite a major theme in the play, and they were very kind of very centered on Australia and on creating this Australian voice. So I think we owe them a huge debt in the creative world.
John Reid comes from a lot of money. What do you think like, what was driving that? What was he fighting against something? Was it just the relationship between them, do you think?
From what I know, from what I've read, he came from a lot of wealth, a lot of money. I mean, he went to Cambridge, studied law there, but he spent a lot of time traveling around Europe on a motorbike, on his own or with friends. So he was always pushing against the system in that sense. He hated boarding school where he was sent in England, and he kind of really resented kind of the traditional life that he was born into. And he wanted something different. And I think he met a soulmate in Sunday because she was the same. They wanted to live, a life less ordinary. They didn't want to be in this kind of privileged circles where your future is kind of laid out for you. They wanted to push against that. And so they were nonconformists. And that's really what I think bonded them together and drove them in their pursuit of, like I said, a life less ordinary.
And so that world, can you describe it? The artist, the messiness, the drinking, the fun,
Well, it was bohemian.
Yeah, bohemian, yeah.
I think is the best word for it. It really was, at the crux of that kind of movement in the early 1900s. And they lived that life. They lived the life that they wanted to live. They made no excuses for it. I mean, John, at the same time, was still working as a solicitor. So he was bringing in money, and Sunday had money from her family. But they used this to kind of insulate themselves from all the other trappings and obligations that came with, living this kind of life. And they funneled that into creating this world at Heide and the Heide Circle and supporting these artists. And from all accounts, it was very bohemian. There weren't a lot of rules. There was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of conflict, a lot of drama, which, of course, makes for a great play.
Indeed. I can't help but think you as an actor and playing a role, or any role, I suppose, but how it might influence you or affect you, your view of the world in kind of embodying this. Let's talk about this role, for example.
That's an interesting point. I mean, we've all kind of talked about that in a sense that this play kind of feels quite validating to artists, to not just the actors, but the other creatives involved as well, as a kind of celebration of this kind of importance of the creative life and the centrality of that to our own lives as well. I mean, we don't really talk in those ways that much in Australia. It's kind of frowned upon a bit, but we all have kind of made those sacrifices. We all kind of did decide to pursue something that is unusual and is very risky. I mean, I can't believe it that I actually did that, but but it's nice to kind of, to steep yourself in this world where that is a valid choice, and that is something that brings value into the world.
What do you mean you can't believe you did that? Did you have a different picture for your life? Did you think you were going to be kind of...
Well, I mean, I was so young. I mean, when I started acting, I mean, I was basically 12 when I started kind of, going to theatre classes and doing, extra work on TV and things like that. And I dropped out of high school at 16 to move to Sydney to do a TV show, to do a country practice. So this teenager kind of decided my fate. And now it's 40 years later. And I just kind of scraped by the skin of my teeth, really. So, it's kind of, I mean, I have this argument with my 14-year-old son all the time when we talk about homework and schoolwork, and he's like, you can't talk, you dropped out. And I'm like, no, I took an opportunity. There's a difference. But it is a risky thing to do. So I do look back on that, and I didn't really have a plan B. I didn't have any backup.
This play, what I mean, I love so much about it, but that it is an Australian play, and it's not like a short, let's give it to you in an hour or something. It is a very rich and dimensional, I suppose, look at the life, but Australian.
Immersive, yeah.
History lesson, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony talked about that. He said, um, he wanted to. I mean, I should point out that the subtitle of the play on the script that we have is Sunday, a fantasy of life at Heide. So it's a kind of an imagined version of Heide. There's that idea of like it's a true story right up to the point until the writer starts writing, and then it's Anthony's story. You know. Um, but he wanted to make a serious play in an Australian accent, in an Australian voice, and to say that we can talk about art and we can talk about ideas and be passionate about them and and not turn away from them and not have that kind of that cringe factor that still comes into play. So no, it is great to kind of immerse yourself in a play that has those ambitions, that has classic ambitions. That's it's kind of Chekhovian, really, especially the way it ends. That's my favorite moment. I think the scene under the oak tree in the garden. I never get sick of playing that scene. It's just beautiful writing. So it's a gift that he's given us. And a great reflection too of the gift that John and Sunday brought to the world.
Incredible gift, yes. And what I was reading about his notes on it was the shadows that he's writing some of the things in between what we do know and this sort of invention. I mean, on that note of, the writer's writing his story, in a way, whenever you turn on, you can't make a documentary. As soon as you put a camera or audio on, it becomes a different story anyway. But what were those shadows like in, that imaginative world? I don't know. Is there, you maybe comment on that? I suppose it's not really a question, but a comment.
I suppose one of the main themes I see that's kind of driving through the play is this, the tension between the patrons and the artist and the ownership of the art.
Absolutely.
Like you said, once you start writing, it changes everything. Once you observe something, that changes everything, right? That's the scientific idea, from what I can kind of grasp. But this is this thing of like what would neither could exist. The patrons couldn't exist without the artist, and vice versa. And there's that kind of blurred lines between the patron and the artist and the professional and the private that are crossed in this play and explored, and that come into conflict, but at the same time could not exist without each other, which is something I find really interesting.
Absolutely. And it's also, I think, the choices you make as well, like that kind of, or I love that scene when you flash back. I love the time moving around, and when the first meeting between John and Sunday, and the choice, what are you going to give me? And then the offerings of Nolan when he's giving her a picture of the future.
No, it's interesting. I mean, there are so many of these things that we discovered even in this second run that I didn't notice the first time around because I was busy trying to get the words under my belt.
For 2 hours 45 or something.
Yeah, but I mean that's just me. Say nothing for what Nikki has to do. But there are so much great echoes and reflections and counterpoints within the play, within the writing, within the structure that reveal themselves in this second time around. That just again goes to what a beautiful piece of writing it is. And originally, like the first script that I read, it was actually much more linear, so it was in chronological order. So it actually started with that scene at the Toorak tennis party with John and Sunday meeting, and then kind of developed from there. But I think the idea when Sarah got involved, it kind of had this less kind of this more kind of temporal quality where it kind of reflects Sunday's consciousness. So it's kind of like she is traveling back and forth through time. So you get that sense of like her rediscovering memories and going back and forth through time. So it kind of became more focused on Sunday. That's the way I kind of read it.
And that freedom and that kind of, I mean, it doesn't really go into it, but the hint of John's kind of sexual proclivities, or that world, that imagined world, I suppose. But what what is that sexual world, that freedom, that...
Yeah, well, they just didn't want the rules, and they weren't moralists, and they didn't put themselves into what we would now consider identity kind of boxes. They were well ahead of their time, I suppose, where they had an open marriage in a sense. They were unconventional. I mean, there are questions about John's sexuality, but it doesn't really interest me that much. But I hadn't read anything that said he was, explicitly gay or bi or what it kind of hinted at. But they were quite happy to not set any rules or boundaries in that regard. And again, that goes towards their nonconformism and their kind of unconventional life that they wanted for themselves.
Do you feel freer as a person after playing a role like this?
Do I feel freer as a person? I don't know about that. I mean, I've always felt fairly free. I don't feel particularly buttoned up. I think.
You did. You left school at 16 and went and became free then, I think.
I've always been fairly unconventional. Yeah.
Well, Matt Day, thank you so much. It is just a divine production. Such a joy.
Thank you so much.
Matt Day there in the absolutely beautiful production. And I love the design as well. We didn't really quite get there, but this hint of the mutedness of Australian landscape with the hint at Ned Kelly, which was to come. That was Matt Day, and that is Sunday, playing at the Drama Theatre at the Opera House until the 7th of December. Look, it is just so great to see such an Australian production on our stages of our history and of our state of mind and of our arts